Okay, nice to have you here. And today I'd like to share with you uh, about this idea of be the change you want to see in the world. So you might have heard this quote. I think it's often attributed to Gandhi. And so it sounds nice. It's hard to argue with Gandhi, um, especially, well, I won't go there. But anyway, so it sounds very nice. But here's the question. Do you really know how to do that? And so I'd like to explore today, is that good advice? And if so, how might you actually take action on that? So I'll cut right to the chase. I think it's great advice. I think it's excellent advice. I think that oftentimes there are a couple of problems that hold people back in life. One of those, this will not come as a surprise to anybody who's been around here before, is that they don't know what they want. But even after somebody knows what they want, then the problem is that they oftentimes don't know how to actually progress with that. And so this advice of be the change you want to see is, I think, excellent advice that can help you with that. So that's what we'll explore today. Just to take a step back before we get into the thick of things, I want to set the context. So what is the intention for this meeting? And so overall, the intention here is to support you in self-knowledge and to living a truly fulfilling life. So, from my perspective, the real aim of life is to know yourself. And in order to know yourself, this has to take place through experience. So, I don't know if I should say has to, but it does take place through experience. And so, it doesn't usually work very well just to try and have a theoretical knowledge of yourself. It happens through practical experience. So, we take steps, we have experience that gives us feedback, which helps us to know more about ourselves if we're paying attention. Of course, you can have lots and lots and lots of experience and still not learn anything about yourself if you're not paying attention, which happens maybe more often than we'd like to admit. But the good news is that we have the ability to actually pay attention, to become more aware of ourselves. And then when we engage in life in the way that I'm describing, then we can gain self-knowledge. So again, that self-knowledge comes through experience and then awareness of the experience. So we get feedback from the experience, which helps us to know more about ourselves. And again, a very important part of this process is knowing what you want. And sometimes people have the, I think, mistaken idea that desire is antithetical to self-knowledge or liberation or freedom or however you want to think about it. And I see that differently. And briefly, I'll explain why that is. I mean, I've already basically said why I think that is, but I'll just elaborate briefly. So, uh, desire is the starting point of experience. So you won't have experience without desire, because the desire is also the idea. It's what gives shape to the experience. If there's no idea, there's no desire, then nothing follows from that. So there has to be first the desire or the idea, and then what has to follow from that is some kind of uh, knowledge of how to proceed, and then there has to be some action taken, and that creates a cycle. And so that's one complete cycle. Is there has to be the desire, then there has to be the knowledge, and then there has to be the action. So the idea is like a feed forward system. So there's some sense of something that could be. It hasn't yet materialized, but there's some sense of what could be. But then in order to realize that, there has to be some action, but you can't take the action unless there's some knowledge of how to take the action. Of course, the knowledge is at that point still theoretical. You don't know for sure that that knowledge is accurate or the correct knowledge. It's in theory, it might lead to the desired outcome. So the only way to test that is to take the action. Once you take the action, then you get feedback. So you can then compare that to the idea. You say, well, did that work? Did it give me the desired outcome? More often than not, it did not. It might have been in somewhere in the same ballpark or vicinity, but if we're lucky. But more often than not, it was really not hitting the target. So then we use that feedback to again inform what's the next knowledge, to refine that knowledge. Then we can take the next action, get more feedback. So it creates this loop. So there's feed forward and feedback happening constantly. So the idea, then there's the knowledge, then the action, then that gives us feedback. So then we can continue in this process. And I'm proposing that that's essential, or at least a one valid path for self-knowledge, because we gain that awareness or that knowledge of ourselves through the experience. And in order to have the experience, there has to first be the desire, and then there has to be the knowledge, and then the action. And we have to continue to repeat that, and it refines so that we get more and more clarity about who am I. So at first we don't know who we are. And so we have to go engage with this process to start to refine that. And through many, many, many iterations of this, we start to get increasing clarity of who I am at many levels. So at first, we may get increasing clarity of who I am at the level of this personality. And oftentimes people in certain kinds of spiritual philosophies, people will dismiss the personality as something that's not real, or that's delusional, or that's the enemy in some way. That they'll say the personality is the ego, and the ego is the enemy. So we should just try and get rid of that. We should never try and do anything to support the ego or the personality. Instead we should try and chip away at it. We should try and get rid of it. So if the personality has desires, we should deny those desires. And I'm proposing that if that works well for you, then fantastic. But if it doesn't work well for you, then reconsider that maybe there's another way. So I don't view that all the desires of the personality and that knowledge of the personality is problematic or antithetical to true spiritual knowledge. I think that they are complementary. I think they can go well together. The problem is when we simply mindlessly indulge the desires of the personality without having any clarity about whether those are authentic desires of the personality. Because if we don't do that, then we're not actually getting much clarity about whether those are who the personality is. And if we don't have any clarity about who the personality is, then we're going to tend to stay at that superficial level instead of getting increasing interest in who is behind the personality. Who is this that is aware of the personality? Who is this that the personality emerges from? So the way I see it is that having knowledge of the personality is a useful aspect of the process, and it's only one part of it. It's not the totality. So we can gain self-knowledge at the level of the personality. What do I want? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What am I here for? What are my gifts? What are the desires that gave rise to this lifetime? And then that can also lead us to have more curiosity and therefore more knowledge of ourselves as that which is not a personality, that which is the we could say the consciousness in which the personality is arising. So these are two broad categories of the self that we can gain awareness of and knowledge of through experience. So I believe that having gaining mastery over experience is useful. And so that's a lot of what I talk about, because I think that that's useful. It's not just about trying to renounce the world and deny the self and these sorts of things, because I've just found that those approaches don't tend to work very well for people who still have bills to pay and children to care for and things like that. So for the rest of us in this world, then this way that I'm proposing, I think, works better. So that's the overall context of the meeting, is to support you in your self knowledge through the path of experience. So having more, we'll say, mindful experience, conscious experience, where you're aware of the desires, the knowledge, the action, and that whole process, so that will continue to give you more refined self-knowledge. So then bringing it back to what is this topic for today, which is to be the change that you want to see. So like I said, one of the biggest problems that people often have is that they don't really know what they want. And if you don't know what you want, then you couldn't proceed to this next part, which is to be the change you want to see. Because if you don't know what you want to see, you can't you can't bring any focus to being the one who would be that. So the first thing is to have some clarity about what it is that you want, the desires. So I'll just briefly touch on that because it's so foundational for the whole thing. So oftentimes, and people who've been here before, you've heard me say this many times, so this will not be new, but it's really important nonetheless, is that many times what happens is that in this society, by and large, uh, there's a tendency to focus on what you don't want. So there's a lot of emphasis on I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't want this, I don't want that, that's bad, I want to avoid that thing. And maybe we're just maybe predisposed to that. It might be kind of hardwired into the organism to have that tendency to view what we don't want to avoid. There could be good arguments for why that might be from an evolutionary perspective. But nonetheless, we want to recognize that that tendency is there to focus on what we don't want. And that's problematic. So it's not necessarily bad. It's just problematic if we don't are not aware of that tendency, because then what happens is it's just a very, very, very slow process. So you can think about it like looking for a needle in a haystack by removing one piece of hay at a time. So through a process of elimination, you will eventually find the needle in the haystack. But that's a relatively slow approach versus, like using a metal detector or something, right? So if you instead focus on what you do want, and then that will help you to hone in on that, and you can come up with those strategies and creative solutions that will help you to arrive at what you do want versus just eliminating one at a time what you don't want. It's worse than that, actually, though, for a couple of reasons. One is that it's an infinite universe, and so there's an infinite number of these metaphorical pieces of hay. And so if your strategy is just to remove one at a time, you'll be doing that forever. And the second problem with that is that there's this law of attention, which is that whatever you put your attention on, you get more of that. So if you're just focused on the things you don't want, you're not actually even removing anything from this metaphorical haystack, because you're just constantly focused on the thing that you don't want. So it's like you take the piece of hay out of the haystack, and then you're just inspecting the piece of hay for all of its defects. How this is not the needle, and it's not metal, and it's defective in all these ways, and I don't like it. So, and just forever and ever focusing on the things that we don't want. So that's what tends to happen. So it's an enormously slow process that has some benefits because things don't change a lot. So there's a lot of stability in that. The problem is just that things don't change very much. So it cuts both ways, right? It's useful because it creates stability. Things don't change much. And if everything is good, then things not changing is great. But if there are things that you do want to change, then you want change. And so focusing on what you don't want, then I would not recommend is a good strategy. So I recommend getting clarity on what you do want. And as elementary as this would seem, and it is, it nonetheless needs to be pointed out because if people don't do this first, then they will struggle with everything that follows because everything hinges upon this. So one very simple yet very powerful question you can ask yourself whenever you notice your mind going to what you don't want, and if you pay attention, you'll notice your mind going to what you don't want a lot. So one really powerful question is, what do I want instead? So if you notice that your thinking is going to, well, I don't want to look like a fool, or I don't want to live in lack, or I don't want to be sick, or I don't want people to dislike me, or I don't want, etc. Fill in the blank. Just notice how much of your thinking is what you don't want. Ask yourself when you're thinking those things, just pause. It's an amazing power that we have that you can actually just pause and then shine a light on it, on that thought, and ask yourself, what do I want instead? And sometimes the answer to that will be very obvious, and sometimes it will surprise you. But either way, it's useful to get that clarity. And it might sometimes, if it seems obvious, then it might not immediately seem useful to make that shift because you might say, well, it's obvious. If I say, I don't want to be sick, then I want to be healthy. Okay. Well, I already knew that. You'd say, well, okay, perhaps, but nonetheless, shifting your attention to what you do want is a very important, powerful step because if you keep focusing on what you don't want, then all your energy goes to that. So you want to instead be clear about the positive that you want. But as I said, oftentimes, if you really honestly, sincerely ask that question, you might be surprised because you might say, well, what do I want instead of lack? And you might say, well, it's obvious I want abundance, or I want prosperity, or I want the money, or I want, but sometimes you might be surprised by what the answer is that comes up. Sometimes it's something different than you think. Not always, but sometimes. So it's always worth sincerely answering the question, not just what you think logically would make sense, but actually to look within yourself and tell the truth about what do you want instead. So that's the first thing is be clear about what you want. And so then, and I recommend writing these things down, by the way. And maybe at first that's a really long list because you might have a really long list of all the things you don't want. And then if you're going to ask yourself, what do I want instead? You might have a really long list of the things you do want. That's okay. You could have worse problems than that. So just write down what you do want. And then you'll probably start to see that there are some patterns that emerge there, and you'll realize there are some things that are repeating many times, or there's some things that really stand out as being the most important. And those are the things that you probably want to prioritize because not all of your desires are equal. So you might want, you might say, well, I want the new house and I want the new car and I want the new spouse and I want this and I want the six-pack abs and I want all these things. And who doesn't? Except for I know some people say, oh, I don't want it, but fine. But some of those things you're going to say, yeah, those are really important to me. But if you really once you have a significant list there, you'll start to realize some of those things are not so important. Some of them are more superficial. Some of those were things that you borrowed. You got them from your parents or your spouse or your children or your neighbors or your teachers or from TV or whatever. So when you can start to see that certain things are more important to you, then those are the things that you're really going to want to focus on. So those are the things then to prioritize. And the number one thing to do is to put your attention on that consistently. So once you've identified those things that are most important to you, then at the very minimum, just make a short list of those things and read that every day, once a day. If you want to read it 2 times a day, awesome. 3 times a day, great. But at a bare minimum, at least once a day, just read it. Because again, the law of attention is whatever you put your attention on, that's where your energy goes. So if you don't do that, then your attention is not going to those things which you've already just determined are most important to you. So that would be foolish, right? Not to put your attention on the things that are most important to you. So at a minimum, just read the list once a day. And you might say, well, that's not going to do much. Well, it's going to do something. right, is going to be better than not doing it. That's the point. So, um, how about just find out what happens? You might be pleasantly surprised. If you just did that every day, try it out. Do that every day for 6 months, and then tell me that your life didn't change. I mean that sincerely. I mean, just if you're thinking, oh, that couldn't help, try it out for 6 months. What do you have to lose? I mean, how long is that going to take you to actually come up with the list? It might take you, 20 minutes, something like that. I mean, for some people it's going to take them longer, but whatever. It's going to take some amount of time. It's not going to be that long. And then just to read that every day, how long will that take you? 10 seconds? So if 10 seconds, 6 months, what is that? It's 100, let's say 180 times 10, 1800. How many? I should be able to do the math on that. That's 60 or 300, 50 minutes, something like that. It's not a lot of time. Spread out over 6 months, 50 minutes. Like how much Netflix do you watch in 6 months? So could you do that and just find out? Uh, so I promise you, if you just did that, you would notice a very significant change. Most people won't do it. I know that. Uh, they just won't because they think it has to be something else. It has to be more complicated or whatever. And that's too bad for you because if you did it, then you would see the results. And if you just did that and only that are you going to have enormous changes in 6 months? Maybe, but maybe not. But definitely worth the investment. No question about it. For sure. One of the most important, best things you could do for yourself. Way more important than pretty much everything else that you do. I mean, think about how much time you spend agonizing over all of these things that relative to that are completely unimportant. Way more than 50 minutes over 6 months. I'm probably doing the math wrong on that, but it's probably something like that. Okay, so that would be the number one thing. Now, that's going to tell you what you want. And if you already think you know what you want, that's fine, but it would still be worth doing the process just to be clear about it, just to know. Okay. But when you know what you want, then here's the problem that a lot of people face is they straight away go to how, right? The process of how am I going to achieve that? So if you want, I'll use my usual, I want $1 million. So for instance, I want $1 million, then for most of us, we straight away go to how will I get $1 million? So now we're in our accessing using our analytical brain. And what are we actually looking to there? We're looking to everything that's happened in the past. In order to come up with the process for how you're going to achieve what you want, you're looking to your past experiences. Well, you didn't yet figure it out based on your past experiences. So why do you think you're going to figure it out this time based on the past experiences? If all you're doing is consulting what you've already done and you're not doing anything really fundamentally to shift that or change that or reorganize that, all you're doing is you're just going to draw upon the same failed strategies without doing anything new. And of course, you could say, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to consult the experts. Well, fine, that might work. I'm not going to deny it. I mean, it could work if you paid for the coaching program and you had the accountability and the expert who's going to guide you in the process, and they maybe that's going to work. That could possibly work, but are you going to do that? Maybe not. And even if you did that, how many of the people who take that approach actually succeed? The numbers are not in your favor. So it's not that it couldn't work. It's just that statistically, it's not good odds because plenty of people pay for those things and don't get the results. Plenty of people pay for them and do get the results, but it's just that it's not guaranteed. So I'm not suggesting that that's a bad approach, but what I am suggesting is that may not be the best place to start because that's just looking at how. So now we'll come back to this issue or this matter of be the change that you want to see. So you want to see a change. And the change that you want to see, usually, not always, but oftentimes, it's something that you want to have or do that's different, right? So if I want $1 million, I want to have $1 million. If I want a new car, I want to have the car. To, uh, if I want to learn, if I want to have some new skill, I want to do that skill. So either usually the focus is on what I want to have or do. And what's often overlooked is that in order to have or do something, you first have to be that, which allows you to have or do. Because uh, those people who are consistently able to express in certain ways are able to do that because that's who they are. And I talked about this, I think, last week. So if you want to have wealth, then you want to behave in wealthy ways. And in order to do that, you need to be wealthy. It's not that you couldn't pull it off short term without having the identity of being wealthy, but if you don't, then it will be short term unless something changes. In order to sustain that, you need to, because in order to have the wealth, you need to behave in ways that are congruent with that. And in order to consistently behave in those ways, you need to have the identity of being wealthy. And this is true of all of anything that you want. So if you want health, then you have to behave consistently in ways that are congruent with that. And in order to do that consistently, you have to have an identity as being somebody who is healthy. If you want to experience, or let's say have loving relationships, then you need to behave consistently in ways that are congruent with that. And in order to do that consistently, you need to have an identity as being somebody who is both loving and lovable. Try and do it some other way, and it won't work. If you can manage that and prove it to me, please do, because it would be news to me. But as far as I am aware, that's the only way that it works. Again, long term. I'm not saying that you can't get short term experiences and results. It's just that in order to have them long term, if you want to sustain those things, it has to be based on an identity. So, so to be the change that you want to see is, I think, very good advice because it's putting the cart and the horse in the right order. If you just want to have the change without being the change, then you've got the cart before the horse, and that will not work long term. But if you put things in the right order, then you can have sustained results. And what's really important about that is if we put this in the context of the intention of this meeting, is that helps you to learn much more efficiently and get much better feedback so that you can gain much more self-knowledge. Because if you think about it, how many of the same things have you been trying to sort out for how long? I mean, isn't it a lot of the same things that you've been struggling with for years, decades? For most of us, that's the truth. For most of us, we've been struggling with the same things. We can trace many of these things that we're still struggling with back to our childhoods, and even further back than that. You know, a lot of these things are like ancestral roots and all kinds of things like that. So there's these same patterns are repeating over and over and over and over. It's almost as if we haven't learned. And if that's the case, then it seems to me that it's time to start to learn. And what I'm proposing is a more efficient way to do that, because if the way that we've been doing it was going to work, it probably would have worked by now. And so the fact that it has not worked satisfactorily up to now could be some good motivating factor for starting to do things differently. And so I'm proposing that being what it is that you want is a good place to start instead of trying to achieve the external thing, hoping that that's going to give you what you actually want. So here now I'll propose to you an approach. So I'll actually guide you through a process that you can use. So this will only work if you know what you want. So if you don't know what you want, then you'll have to do the first thing first, which is get clarity about what you do want. But if you do know what you want, then you can actually go through this process as I guide it now, and then you'll see how this works. So if you have many things that you want, just choose one to start with, because you can really only do one thing at a time consciously. And what we're going to be doing is conscious, so you have to focus on one thing. So just choose one thing. And if you have any resistance to that because there's some part of your brain that says, oh, but I don't know which one to choose, they all seem so important, just let yourself know that any one of them will do. So, it's fine. Just choose one, and then you can loop back around and apply the same process to the others when you would like to. But in order for it to work, you have to just choose one thing to start. So just choose one thing of the things that you want. And if you say, well, I'm not 100% sure that I really want that thing, that's okay. For this process, this will still, what I'm going to guide you through will still work. So if you have 75% clarity, that's fine. You can still do the process. So just choose one thing that you want. And it could be some kind of material thing. You want the house or the car or the money or the career, or you want to, to publish a book or to make a painting or to sell a painting or to have some kind of show or production or performance. You want to uh, star in a Hollywood film, or you want to get married, or you want to travel to a certain destination, you want to do cartwheels, whatever the thing is. So it could be any kind of thing. And now imagine imagine yourself having that. Imagine yourself achieving that. So for this, it's really important that you're actually imagining, like as if you were watching a movie of yourself having this achievement or accomplishment or whatever it is that you want. And so for many of you, you'll be able to do this straight away. And if that's you, then that's fantastic. Sometimes what will happen is you'll notice that you kind of struggle to imagine it. And if you're struggling to imagine it, then I'm going to share with you something that will be helpful to you so that you will be able to imagine it. And if you're able to imagine this thing now, what I'm going to share with you is still going to be useful for you, because at some point you're going to use this process with something where you're likely to struggle to imagine having the outcome that you want. So if you struggle to imagine the outcome that you want, then of course, consciously, you want the thing that you want, right? So consciously, you want the thing that you want. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten to this point, right? So consciously, you identified that you want this thing. But if you're having some resistance, then unconsciously, there's some part of you that resists that. And so what you can do is, well, first of all, it's important to understand that all parts of you are working toward the same fundamental goal, which is we could say, to be happy, to know love, to know peace, to know harmony, to experience wholeness and oneness. So all parts of you are working toward that same goal, but sometimes different parts have different strategies. So this conscious part of you wants to accomplish this thing, but there's some unconscious part that has some different idea. And usually this is because of some prior experience or experiences you may remember, you may not remember, in which this part learned that uh, achieving those things might be problematic in some way, might be in some way perceived as a threat to this other thing that you value that's important to you. So just acknowledge that, and then just ask this part, what is it that you want through this resistance? Or what is your positive intention with this resistance. And just notice whatever comes up straight away. So don't censor yourself. Maybe it makes sense to you, maybe it doesn't make sense to you consciously, but just don't censor, just acknowledge whatever comes up straight away. And more often than not, it's because this part wants to protect you from something. So oftentimes it's because the part says, well, maybe if I had that, then maybe I would look foolish, or if I had that, then maybe I would fail, or if I had that, maybe I would get hurt, or if I had that, then maybe it would be too difficult, or something like that. So you just want to ask and find out whatever it says, and then you can just ask this part. Uh, if you had that, whatever that is, so if you had the protection, or if you had the whatever this part is wanting to accomplish through the resistance, what would that give you? You're just going to keep asking that question of whatever the response is until sooner or later this part's going to let you know what its real intention is. So it has this chain of strategies, but ultimately its intention is something like love or joy or happiness or peace or freedom, abundance, clarity, connection, something like that. And when you discover what that is, then you can just ask that part, if this part uh, can see the possibility that uh, what you're wanting consciously might possibly be compatible with whatever this intention is. Okay, so if the intention is, let's say, the intention of the resistance ultimately is love, let's say, you would say to this part, can is it possible that it might be there might be a way in which achieving this thing that I want could be compatible with love? Maybe not in the way that you've been thinking about it, but is it at least possible that there could be some way? And more often than not, the answer to that will be yes. And so then you can just make an agreement that you're only going to uh, consider those ways of achieving what you want that are compatible with that intention: love, harmony, peace, joy, whatever it is. And this will help to relieve the resistance. So if there's, uh, so once you've done that, then again, you could imagine achieving whatever it is that you want, whatever that is. Whether it's dancing on Broadway or publishing your book or having a child or getting married or having $1 million or uh, going, hiking Mount Kilimanjaro or whatever the thing is that you want. And it doesn't have to be big. It's whatever is just true for you, big, small, medium, whatever's true for you. And just imagine that again, like a movie, like you can see yourself achieving that, having that. If there's still any kind of resistance, you can go through that same process again. So there may be some other part of you that has some other resistance. So you just go through that same process. It usually does not happen, but if on rare occasions there might be multiple parts that have resistance, you can resolve those. And eventually you'll be able to imagine yourself having or achieving or doing the thing that you want. And now here's the important thing. Notice when you see yourself having or doing what it is that you want, notice who that person is, that version of yourself. And notice that that version of yourself is different than how you've been conceiving of yourself now. So notice that that version of yourself is connecting to inner resources and expressing qualities. Just notice what those are. So you might notice, for example, that version of yourself is connecting to and expressing joy, peace, happiness, connection, love. I don't know what that is for you. I'm just giving you examples. So just notice those qualities and those inner resources that version of yourself is connecting to and expressing. And now here's the important thing is that that's who you need to be in order to achieve that. So a lot of the time we think, oh, I will, when I achieve the thing, then I'll become that person. But it's not so. When you become that person, you'll achieve the thing. And even more important is this, that when you are that person, whether you achieve the thing or not, you're fulfilled. Because sometimes we still want the thing. And sometimes once we become that person, we realize we didn't even want the thing after all. So getting the thing, having the thing, doing the thing is secondary. It's a secondary importance. The main, most important thing is who you need to be in order to be able to achieve or have that or do that. So now you have a picture of yourself, the version of yourself that you need to be in order to achieve what it is that you want. So now be that person starting now. So how might you do that? Well, a number of ways. So one way is just to notice that when you actually imagine yourself in that way now, that in order to imagine that, you actually have to connect to those qualities and inner resources presently. There's no other way. So you might say, well, but it doesn't seem to be as strong. I don't seem to be as experiencing it as strongly or as fully or completely in the present moment as I imagine I will be in the future. That's fine. Because you just have not yet had enough practice in order to feel comfortable and confident with that. But nonetheless, the only way that you could imagine it is to be able to connect with that now. So just notice that that's true. Notice that even if it's just a small amount, that in order to imagine that, you have to connect to those things now. So if you're imagining that in order to be that, in order to have what you want, you have to be you have to be someone who experiences connection. Then notice, in order to imagine that, you have to actually experience some of that connection within yourself now. It's the only way you could know about it. It's the only way you could imagine it is to actually connect with that now within yourself. So this is now practice. So just notice that you can imagine that, and then you can just bring your attention here and now and notice that you're actually connecting and experiencing those qualities and those inner resources that you need to access in order to be that person, to have or do what you want. So each time you imagine this, you're practicing. And each time you practice, then this is an experience that will build your identity as somebody who has or connects to or expresses that quality or inner resource. So even if up to now you have not strongly identified with those things, by imagining it, you're connecting to that now, which means you're practicing it now, which means you're having that experience now. So each time you do that, it becomes more familiar, more part of your identity. So that's one thing. Now, another thing is that you can also start to strengthen these qualities in your identity by reorganizing things from your past. So, and I talked about this last week, so you could just notice that how do you know that you're not already those things? The only way you could know that is because you'd be looking to your memories, and you'd say, well, I don't have enough memories of expressing or experiencing that quality, and therefore I'm not that thing. So if you say, well, In order to have what I want to have, I would need to be somebody who is abundant, an abundant person, connecting to inner abundance. But then you say, but I'm not an abundant person now. Okay, how do you know you're not an abundant person? Well, you have to be consulting your memories. And it's in order for that to be true, if you say that you do not identify as an abundant person, what that means is that you have organized your memories such that you don't have a lot of reference points for what it is to be an abundant person. Does that mean that you have never had any experiences of abundance? Absolutely not. It just means that you have not organized your experiences in such a way that you can easily access and identify with those memories that support being an abundant person. But you can change that. You can change that now. And here's how you can do it. So, first of all, you want to find out if you have any resistance to making that quality certain for yourself. So, whatever that quality might be. So, if it's abundant, okay, so say if the quality is abundant, then you just ask yourself, do you have any resistance to being an abundant person? And hopefully this is clear. This would apply to any quality. So let's say if it was intelligent, do you have any resistance to being an intelligent person? If it's kind, do you have any resistance to being a kind person? If it's happy, do you have any resistance to being a happy person? And if so, then you can go through that same exercise that I guided a few moments ago. Because consciously, you've already identified that consciously you would like to identify as that quality. Because you've already identified that in order to have the thing that you want to have or do the thing that you want to do, you need to be that person. So consciously, you want to be that person. But it can sometimes happen that unconsciously there's some part that resists that. And so you can help yourself to release that resistance by going through that same exercise. So you just ask this part that has the resistance what its positive intention for you is with that. And then you just ask, and what does that give you? Until you arrive at whatever the real intention of that is. And of course, whatever the intention of that is will ultimately be compatible with whatever this quality is. Because assuming you've done this all correctly, then the qualities at this level will be compatible because they're all going to be things like love, happiness, joy, peace, abundance, connection, clarity, things like that. So they all go together. It's just that in our old habits and our old way of organizing things for ourselves, we didn't know that. And that just was a matter of, it was just because our learning in the past was largely unconscious. So different parts did the different learning at different times when we had less access to the different knowledge and resources. And so we just kind of, it was a mishmash of things assembled together without it being consciously constructed in a coherent way. So we didn't realize that all of these things could go together. But in fact, they can. So when you take a look at it in this way, you'll start to realize, oh yes, they can all go together. It was just because of old old ignorance, lack of understanding of certain things, because I learned these things when I was very young, and I put things together in ways that weren't perfectly organized, that I thought that there were incompatibilities, but really all of these things can go together. And when you have that realization, then it will remove the resistance, and then you'll realize, yes, in fact, it's perfectly safe, and I do desire through and through to be this quality. Now, when that's the case, all you have to do is start to look and see that you actually have examples of being that quality. Just have to be willing to open up to seeing those. Now, they might not be big examples. So, and I talked about this last week. If you're only, if you say, well, the only examples have to be these really big dramatic examples. The only way that I could be an abundant person would be if every day of my life I people were serving me on golden platters, and I wiped my butt with $1 million bills. I don't know. There's no such thing, but but if that's the only way you can be abundant, then then you're going to continue to have an absence of sufficient examples. But if you start to realize that there are many ways to be abundant, many ways to experience and express abundance, to be abundant within, to experience abundance, to experience the abundance of, perhaps you realize there were many moments in your childhood in which you experienced, abundance of curiosity, an abundance of play, an abundance of air, an abundance of sunshine, an abundance of uh, interesting experiences, abundance of all kinds of things. So there, there, there has been experiences of whatever the qualities are that are important to you. You just have to be willing to open to them and start to see them and discover them. Now, this is not like whitewashing. This is not trying to deceive yourself or lie to yourself. This is actually just starting to allow yourself to gain access to those qualities that are already present within you. It's not to deceive yourself. It's not to say that you were served on golden platters when you were not. But it's just that when you start to find even those small examples and you start to realize you have so many of them, it will start to strengthen that for you, and it creates a stronger foundation. So when you know that you have a lot of these experiences in your life that support you being this quality, this identity, then it creates this foundation from which you can more thoroughly develop and grow being that person. So then you already are that person who can have and do the things that you want to have and do. This does not mean that you immediately have and do the things that you want to the same scale and degree. It just means that you suddenly realize you actually have a stable, solid foundation from which you can grow and have more of the experiences that you want, versus trying to do it the hard way, where you're trying to build that identity by without a foundation. So hopefully that's clear to you. If you've been able to follow along, then hopefully you've discovered something very valuable and useful and life-changing. And I would also recommend that you repeat this exploration many times, because every time that you do it, you'll discover something new. And just to be clear, just so it's crystal clear, I am not proposing that this is a complete substitute for also taking other actions. What I am saying is that all of this will create a very solid, stable foundation that will allow you to have the clarity about what actions are most congruent with the things that you want to experience and have and do in life. And it will make those actions much more natural for you. So that instead of fighting against yourself, trying to force yourself to do the things that you think you have to do in order to have the things that you want, which doesn't work very well, those things will naturally start to occur. And they will naturally start to occur in a way that is very harmonious for you. Because a lot of the time, if we're trying to force it, then we're trying to force something that's not harmonious, creates a lot of resistance. And so that doesn't work very well. But when you do this process, you'll start to realize that you already naturally can and do express in those ways that are harmonious for you, that are congruent with the things that you want. And the more of those things that you can allow to emerge naturally and harmoniously from you, the more you can achieve the things that you want in ways that are completely natural and harmonious for you, not forced, not the way that somebody else would do it, not the way that the so-called experts tell you to do it, but the way that is actually authentic and true for you, that will give you the true fulfillment that you're really desiring. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. And for those who are here live, we'll stay on for the group coaching. For those who are going to watch us on YouTube, if you are interested in joining these sessions live, then I welcome you to do so. And you can get that information by signing up for the newsletter on my website at joeylat.com. And among the benefits of joining live is that then you can participate in the group coaching that follows. And so when you do that, then if you have questions, you're welcome to ask those questions. And if you want to be coached through some particular process, then we can do that here live. And also when you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get access instantly to the free ebook, which includes coverage of 5 of the fundamental laws of creation, which I really highly recommend because it will give you a solid basis in understanding how creation works fundamentally, including among those 5 is the law of attention, which I touched on briefly today. And so I really recommend and encourage people to check that out. And then the other thing that I'll mention is that for those who are interested in receiving my support in achieving your goals and really fulfilling your purpose in this life over a 9-week period, I encourage you to check out the Manifesting Truth program. It is a paid program. It is the best program that I am aware of that supports you in an unprecedented way in really putting into practice those simple fundamental things that will help you to, from the ground up, create that foundation in your life that will allow you to achieve the things that you want in a way that seems virtually effortless, because you will have put into practice those simple habits that will just allow for things to start to happen for you in ways that seem magical. And so I encourage you to check that out. Again, that's at joeylat.com/manifesting-truth, and I'll provide the link in the description below. So for those watching on YouTube, I'll say that's all for now. Blessings to you, and I will see you next time.